The Enderman Slayer is the most recently added and by far the hardest of the 4 Slayer types. It is the only Slayer type that poses a threat to most late and endgame players, which is why I want to show you the best ways to do it at all stages of the game. In this video, I am going to be going over the basics of how this boss works, the gear that you need to have to fight it, and the different techniques that you can use in order to make it easier. If you haven't watched the other 3 parts of my Slayer miniseries, they will be linked in a playlist in the description, and I recommend that you check them out. With that said, let's get right into the guide. The first thing that I want to do in this video is go over the basics of how this boss works. This isn't going to be super detailed because I already have a video doing exactly that. The Enderman Slayer, also known as the Voidgloom Seraph, comes in 4 different varieties, ranging from 300,000 to 300 million health. Notably, this is a lot more than any other Slayer type, having 30 times as much health as a tier 5 zombie and 60 times as much as a tier 4 Sven. Their abilities are on screen now, but the most important thing to note about Endermen is that they fight in phases. This is really important because one of the most critical strategies to being effective at doing Enderman Slayer relies off these phases. They also have a number of ways to break up the fight by placing down things that, if not dealt with, will kill you. Like I said, I went over this in more detail in a separate video. Before I start to get into the discussion of the gear you need to be able to do the Enderman Slayer, I want to address something that will probably be commented on this video that will look like this. Or this, or any other number of comments like this. This is late game content. If you're in the early or middle stages of the game, you might be able to attempt tier 1s and tier 2s, but especially once you get past tier 3s, it will be very much barred based on how much money and time you've put into the game. Tier 1s and tier 2s can be completed using basically any gear by using a cheese strat that involves Remnants of the Eye. Remnants of the Eye are a special item that, while held in your inventory on the end island, will be consumed when you die and will instead save you from certain death. While these are great with helping out with early game slayers, even if your inventory is full of them, you will only get 1 saved life. Dying consumes all of the Remnants of the Eye in your inventory, and they don't work inside the Void Sepulchre, meaning that you'll have to come out of the Void Sepulchre every single time you want to spawn a boss. That is why, in general, most people don't use them, and is also why Enderman Slayer tends to be very exclusive to late game players. In general, the cheapest and easiest but also slowest to grind with armor for doing Enderman Slayer is Final Destination armor. This armor set can be leveled up so that it gives the user thousands of defense. However, the difficulty with this is that it doesn't give you very many damage stats. That is why in general, this setup tends to be used by players who have less money to spare. However, it still is pretty decent. That is why many players tend to go for a damage setup that looks like this, using a 3/4 damage pieces and a Warden helmet. The reason I say damage pieces instead of Necron's pieces is because a lot of people choose to go with elegant tuxedo jackets instead of Necron's chest plates. This option results in more damage and fewer defensive stats. However, it works out because of a strategy that I will explain to you now. The most critical item to this strategy is the Endstone Sword, because it allows you to become completely invulnerable to damage for 5 seconds at a time. The basis of this strategy is that every 50 million damage you deal to your boss puts it in one of its rest phases, which allows you to regen mana. If you can deal 50 million damage to the boss within the 5-second window that the Endstone Sword gives you, you can deal damage to it while entirely immune to its damage. To explain this in more detail, I need to go over the other items in my hotbar, the first of which being the Atom Split Katana. This is your main damage source and is how you are going to be taking the boss from 300 million to 0 health. Using this item costs 200 mana, but gives you plus 400 ferocity towards Enderman. Each phase of 50 million damage requires 2 activations of your weapons and 700 mana, 200 mana to use the Atom Split Katana, and at least another 500 mana to use the Endstone Sword to its fullest potential. In order to regenerate mana fast enough in between cycles, you need at least an Overflux Power Orb and preferably a Plasma Flux. However, if you still don't have quite enough mana, you can use a Soul Whip with Mana Steal on it and right-click from afar. The last item that is critical to this strategy is something that can hold summons like a Reaper Scythe or a Summoning Ring. These are used to deal with the hit phases of the Enderman boss, and most people like to use tank zombies as they happen to move pretty slowly and have a lot of health. The last two items, being the Aspect of the Void and the Hyperion, are purely used for utility, such as mobility and healing. In general, you want to start boss fights with full mana, meaning that you should spawn your summons long before you need them. Spawning bosses is generally pretty simple, and only involves going around and killing the Void Sepulture Enderman. When it comes time to actually spawn your boss, you want to find an area that is large, flat, and open, and it doesn't have somebody else already spawning their boss there. To start the first hit phase, you need to make sure that the boss hits you at least once. If you don't do this, it means that your summons won't know what to attack and will stand around doing basically nothing. When the boss has around 10 to 20 hits left is when you want to place down your Plasma Flux. Although some people can do bosses in under a minute, I personally can't most of the time, meaning that if I were to place my Plasma Flux as soon as the boss fight started, by the time I was in the third hit phase, I'd probably be out of Plasma Flux. After that, the cycle is pretty standard. Each time the boss is available to be damaged, you use your Atom Split and then you use your Endstone Sword. This will consume all of your mana and will give you a decent bit of time where you can deal damage to the boss and not receive damage back. While the boss is in its hit or laser phase, you can right-click it with the Soul Whip, regenerating a little bit of health or mana. From there, all you have to do is repeat this cycle. It really isn't super complicated and just requires a little bit of time to get the hang of it. Ideally, bosses can be completed in under a minute, but don't feel bad if you don't get this because it is pretty difficult. The best pet option for doing Enderman Slayer is the Ender Dragon because it gives you a ton of damage and tank stats, along with increasing your damage towards end mobs by 25%. There are other valid options such as the Yeti or Blue Whale, but in general they won't be nearly as good. When it comes to Talisman Reforges, the most important number to hit is that you want to have at least 82 attack speed. For most people, the best way to accomplish this is by reforging all of your legendary and mythic talismans to strong, reforging all of your rare and lower talismans to shaded, and then reforging all of your epic talismans to strange. From there, you can check how much attack speed you have, and then unreforge them or reforge them back to shaded or strong until you have about 85 attack speed. If you have any other tips for doing Enderman Slayer, I recommend that you comment them down below so I can pick out my favorites and put them in the video's description. If you have any other questions regarding Enderman Slayer or Skyblock in general, I recommend that you join my Discord server or guild where you can talk to me and my staff directly. The link to join both will be in the description below and in the pinned comment. I know that Enderman Slayer is far less accessible than the other Slayer types, and that is largely by design. It's supposed to be a late and endgame only kind of content, and that does mean that it is very difficult. That being said, with proper gear and patience, it is very much worth it because it can make a ton of money and unlock some of the best items in the entire game. With that, that wraps up this video and the Slayer miniseries. Once again, if you want to watch the other videos in this series, they will be linked in the description below and on a card now. With that, I'll see you guys later, and adios. Ooga booga.